The forest floor, a tapestry of decay and rebirth, had kept its secrets for a quarter of a century. October 17th, 2020, a Tuesday. The drone, an agile sentinel of modern forestry, hummed its methodical path over the remote tracts of the Oakhaven National Wilderness. Its operator, a young surveyor named Ethan Vance, watched the real-time feed on his tablet, a mundane grid of pines and birches blurring into the predictable hues of autumn. Then a flicker, an anomaly, not a natural feature, not a rockfall, but a geometric intrusion in the wild's organic chaos. A glint of unnatural color, stubbornly persistent through the high-resolution lens. Ethan, accustomed to the deceptive tricks of light and shadow, marked the coordinates. He promised himself a closer look, a formality. Another day, another curious detail in the vast, indifferent expanse of the woods. He did not know he was about to brush against the veil of an enduring enigma. He was about to unearth a whisper from the void, a chilling echo of the past that the mountains had swallowed whole. 25 years prior, on September 12th, 1995, Arthur and Eleanor Vance, both in their late 60s, had set out for what they described as a final autumn pilgrimage. Not related to Ethan, but a shared surname in a region where such things are common. They were avid hikers, meticulous planners, their lives a testament to routine and preparedness. Arthur, a retired cartographer, possessed an almost obsessive understanding of topography. Eleanor, a former librarian, cataloged every detail, from trail conditions to anticipated weather patterns in a series of leather-bound journals. Their destination, the Whispering Peaks Trail, a moderate 12-mile loop known for its panoramic views and challenging yet well-marked terrain. They drove their forest-green 1988 Subaru Outback, leaving their suburban home in Willow Creek at precisely 6:30 a.m. The neighbors saw them off, a casual wave, a promise of postcards. The mountains don't explain why that promise was never kept. At 7:02 a.m., their Subaru passed the ranger station checkpoint, its passage logged by a sleepy attendant who recalled Eleanor's bright red windbreaker and Arthur's friendly nod. This was the last confirmed visual contact with the couple. At 8:19 a.m., a single ping from Arthur's archaic brick-like satellite phone registered on a distant tower, placing them roughly 3 miles into the trail near the initial ascent. A check-in, a digital breadcrumb. The signal was weak, almost an afterthought, but present. After that, silence. No further pings, no emergency calls. Just the vast, expanding quiet of the wilderness, the void. The family grew concerned by sundown when the couple failed to return. The authorities were notified. A search commenced, a massive undertaking involving hundreds of volunteers, K-9 units, and aerial surveillance. The forest yielded nothing. No broken branches, no discarded wrappers, no misplaced gear. The mountains offered no clues. The mountains kept their secrets. The initial search phase was a maelstrom of urgency and desperation, an almost frantic push against the rapidly diminishing daylight and the encroaching cold of the mountain nights. Search parties, organized with military precision, fanned out across the designated trail and beyond, expanding their perimeter daily. Every gully, every rock overhang, every dense thicket was meticulously scrutinized. The Oakhaven Wilderness, however, is a formidable adversary, its ancient trees forming an impenetrable canopy, its terrain a labyrinth of steep ascents, sudden drops, and hidden crevasses. The forest floor, often obscured by a thick carpet of fallen leaves and dense undergrowth, swallowed evidence whole. The prevailing theory was a tragic accident, a wrong turn, a fall, exposure. Yet Arthur and Eleanor were not novices. They were experienced, their gear top tier, their knowledge of wilderness survival extensive. The irony of their preparedness, a recurring theme in such disappearances, gnawed at the investigators. Their strength became the silence surrounding their fate. No signal, no trace, just silence. The Subaru Outback was found 2 days later, precisely where they had parked it at the trailhead, unlocked. A half-eaten bag of trail mix on the dashboard. Eleanor's favorite paperback novel face down on the passenger seat. In the trunk, their larger camping gear, a tent, sleeping bags, a portable stove, remained untouched. It was as if they had simply stepped out for a short walk, intending to return momentarily. The vehicle offered no signs of struggle, no forced entry, no indication of foul play. It was an anomaly that deepened the mystery. Why would seasoned hikers leave behind essential overnight gear if they intended a prolonged excursion? The evidence log from the car became a poignant catalog of their lives. A pair of reading glasses, a neatly folded road atlas, a classical music cassette tape still in the player. Each item, mundane in itself, became a silent testament to lives interrupted, a narrative frozen in time. The very ordinariness of these artifacts underscored the extraordinary nature of their disappearance. The investigation, despite its intensity, eventually succumbed to the brutal realities of cold cases. Leads dried up. Tips proved fruitless. The media attention, initially a roaring inferno, dwindled to a dying ember. The Vance family, left with an agonizing void, hired private investigators, consulted psychics, and walked the trails themselves, calling out names that only the wind could carry. Years turned into decades. The Oakhaven Wilderness continued its slow, indifferent consumption of all it held. The case files, meticulously compiled, grew heavy with reports, witness statements, and forensic analyses that ultimately led nowhere. The sheer volume of data, the meticulousness of the investigation, stood in stark contrast to the absolute lack of any substantive discovery. The mountains don't explain why. The mountains keep their secrets. Then came October 17th, 2020. Ethan Vance, following up on his drone's peculiar finding, hiked into the coordinates. The air was crisp, the scent of pine needles and damp earth heavy in the air. He navigated through a dense section of old-growth forest, a place so remote that it rarely saw human foot traffic. The GPS on his handheld device led him to a small, almost hidden gully, choked with ferns and fallen logs. And there it was. Not the whole object, not at first, but a glimpse. A flash of forest green, almost perfectly camouflaged by years of moss and lichen growth. It was a backpack. Not just any backpack, but a high-end internal frame hiking pack, the kind favored by serious outdoors enthusiasts. The fabric, though faded and weathered, still held its distinctive hue. He approached with a sense of trepidation, a quiet reverence for what this discovery might represent. Slow pans over weathered objects. The camera would linger here, on the worn fabric, the corroded zippers, the straps that had long since surrendered their rigidity to the elements. Macro shots of dirt, moss, or rust. The patina of time, the slow decay of manufactured objects returning to the earth. Ethan carefully, almost ritualistically, unzipped the main compartment. Inside, protected by a waterproof liner, were items remarkably preserved. A plastic-cased compass, still pointing north. A detailed topographical map of the Whispering Peaks Trail, folded to the exact section where they were last known to be. A first aid kit, its contents still sealed. A small, well-worn journal, Eleanor's journal. Its leather cover, though aged, was still discernible. And then a small black-and-white photograph tucked into a side pocket. A picture of Arthur and Eleanor, younger, smiling, standing at a trailhead sign. Not the Whispering Peaks, but another, earlier adventure, a flashbulb transition for time-stamped photos, the present sharply contrasting with the past. The journal, water-stained but mostly legible, provided a chilling, fragmented narrative. Eleanor's neat handwriting, now a testament to time's slow march, chronicled their journey up to a certain point. Her entries detailed weather conditions, flora and fauna observed, and even a minor complaint about a blister on Arthur's heel. The last entry was dated September 12, 1995, at approximately 9:30 a.m. Her final words, precise and almost clinical, read, "Arthur believes he has found a shortcut, a faint game trail, barely visible, says it will save us an hour. I have my doubts, but he is insistent. The view from up there, he claims, will be spectacular." Heading off the main path now. Heading off the main path now. The repetition was unnerving, a subtle tremor of apprehension. Why would they do this? Why would meticulous planners, experienced hikers, deviate from a marked trail for a supposed shortcut, especially when they were already well into their planned hike? The discovery of the backpack in Eleanor's journal reignited the cold case. The meticulous analysis began anew, but this time with tangible evidence. Forensic experts meticulously cataloged every item. The GPS data from the backpack's location was overlaid with Arthur's last known satellite phone ping. The deviation from the main trail was significant, placing the backpack nearly a mile and a half off course in a direction entirely opposite to where the Whispering Peaks summit lay. The faint game trail Eleanor mentioned was likely a deer path or an animal track, easily mistaken for a human-used shortcut by an overconfident individual, even one as experienced as Arthur. The rule of irony, their greatest strength, their self-reliance and expertise, may have ironically led them astray. The mountains don't explain why. The mountains keep their secrets. The forensic reconstruction of October 1995 began with the backpack's precise location, a coordinate designated as Site Alpha. It sat at the base of a nameless limestone shelf, a natural amphitheater of gray stone and weeping moss. The investigators of 2020, equipped with LiDAR, light detection and ranging, mapped the surrounding canopy, peeling back the digital layers of vegetation to see the ground as it was. What they found was a topographical trap. The shortcut Arthur Vance had identified was a classic geographical lure, a false ridge that appeared to parallel the main trail but gradually veered into a drainage basin known locally as the Devil's Throat. At 10:14 a.m., the journal notes a drop in temperature. "The sun has gone behind the ridge," Eleanor wrote. "Arthur says we are close. The compass seems sluggish." Forensic analysts now know this sluggishness was likely the result of localized magnetic anomalies caused by high iron deposits in the limestone, a detail a master cartographer like Arthur would have known had he not been blinded by the cognitive bias of the shortcut. They were walking into a topographical blind spot. No signal, no orientation, just the encroaching shadows. The transition from confident hikers to victims of the terrain is often a quiet, incremental process. It is rarely a single catastrophic event, but a series of minor logical choices that lead to an illogical end. At 11:45 a.m., the journal entries become shorter, the handwriting tighter, reflecting a physiological shift into high-stress survival mode. "The trail has vanished," the entry reads. "Arthur is looking for the markers. We are climbing now to get a better view. The mist is rolling in from the north." This is the moment of the open loop. Why would they continue to climb upward into a thickening mist rather than retracing their steps to the last known trail marker? The grieving investigator looking at the topographical maps 25 years later sees the tragedy in the contours. They were climbing toward a false summit, a jagged finger of rock that offered no view, only a sheer drop into a ravine that had never been fully surveyed. By 1:30 p.m. on that fateful day in 1995, the weather data recovered from historical meteorological log shows a sudden, unpredicted cold front sweeping through the Oakhaven Wilderness. Temperatures plummeted from 58 degrees to 34 degrees in less than 90 minutes. In the backpack found by Ethan, a pair of heavy wool gloves remained at the very bottom, beneath the first aid kit. They had never been taken out. This is the rule of irony in its cruelest form. The very gear designed to save them remained packed, perhaps because the onset of hypothermia had already begun to cloud their judgment. Hypothermia is a thief of reason. It makes the victim feel warm when they are freezing and makes complex tasks like unzipping a bag feel impossible. Imagine you are standing on that false summit, the mist a cold, wet shroud against your face, your fingers fumbling with a zipper that feels like it weighs 50 pounds. You are prepared, yet you are powerless. The evidence log at Site Alpha grew more disturbing as the forensic team excavated the immediate area. 3 meters from the backpack, buried under 6 inches of leaf mold, they found a single hiking boot. Size 9, female. The laces were not broken, they were neatly tied. In cases of extreme hypothermia, victims often engage in paradoxical undressing, a phenomenon where the brain, in its final moments of failure, perceives a burning heat and commands the body to strip away its protection. The discovery of the boot was a grim milestone. It shifted the narrative from a disappearance to a recovery. 15 feet further down the slope, a metallic glint led the team to a silver thermos, its vacuum seal still intact. When opened in the lab, it contained the faint residue of Earl Grey tea, Eleanor's favorite, a mundane comfort in a place of absolute cold. At 3 p.m., the 1995 log of the satellite phone tower recorded a final ghost ping. It lasted less than a second. It didn't carry enough data to transmit a location, but it indicated the device had been powered on one last time. Was it Arthur trying to find a signal in the abyss? Or was it a mechanical fluke, a dying battery's last gasp? The investigators of the present day use metadata to try and triangulate this ghost ping, but the GPS drift in the ravine is too great. The mountains distort the math. The mountains defy the satellites. The reconstruction shows that by this time the couple had likely become separated. The journal found in the bag suggests the bag was abandoned at the base of the shelf, while the boot was found higher up. Why would they leave the bag? The bag contained their food, their water, their map. To leave the bag is to surrender to the void. The expert victim profile of Arthur Vance is particularly haunting to the modern analysts. He was a man who had mapped the world, yet he could not map his own exit from a 12-mile loop. His maps were found in the backpack, meticulously annotated with pencil marks that stopped abruptly at the edge of the Whispering Peaks Trail. There is a specific type of horror in seeing the literal edge of a man's knowledge. Beyond the pencil marks lay the white space of the map, the unexplored territory where the shortcut was supposed to lead. In the archives of the Willow Creek Sheriff's Department, there is a forensic image of Arthur's office, taken weeks after he vanished. It shows a desk covered in topographical charts, a life dedicated to the precision of lines and degrees. The irony is a heavy, suffocating weight. The man who knew where everything was ended up where no one could find him. As the 2020 recovery team pushed deeper into the ravine, they utilized thermal imaging, not to find life, but to find the thermal signature of disturbed earth. Even after 25 years, the way soil settles over bone or metal is different from the natural stratification of the forest floor. At 4:45 p.m. on the third day of the modern search, the thermal camera registered a cooling anomaly beneath a fallen hemlock tree. The tree had been down for at least 2 decades, its trunk a nursery for bright orange shelf fungi. Beneath the rot, they found the remains of a small fire. It hadn't burned for long. A few charred twigs of mountain laurel, a wood that burns hot but fast. There were no stones around the fire, no attempt to contain it. It was a desperate fire, a fire of someone who knew the night was coming and that the night would be final. The grieving investigator, often a younger relative or a dedicated cold case hobbyist, looks at these charred twigs and sees a final act of defiance. The mountains don't explain why the fire failed, but the forensic evidence suggests the wood was too green, the air too damp. The narrative truth begins to emerge from the physical evidence. It is a story of a shortcut that turned into a spiral. At 5:12 p.m. on that 1995 evening, the sun would have set behind the western peaks, plunging the ravine into a total predatory darkness. Without their flashlights, which were found in the side pocket of the abandoned backpack, Arthur and Eleanor would have been effectively blind. The terrain in the Devil's Throat is a minefield of moss-covered boulders and slick, wet timber. One misstep, one slip, just silence. The discovery of a second item at the campfire site changed the tone of the investigation, a small brass locket. Inside, a photograph of a young boy, perhaps 5 years old, with a gap-toothed smile. Ethan Vance, standing among the investigators, recognized the photo. It was his father. The impossible discovery was no longer just a professional milestone for the surveyor. It was a bridge across a 25-year chasm. The locket was found near the fire, but there were no remains there. The open loop remained. If they made a fire here, why were their belongings scattered hundreds of yards apart? The movement of the items suggests a chaotic, disjointed flight through the woods. It suggests a moment where the expert victims ceased to be experts and became merely human, driven by a primal, terrified urge to move, even if moving meant moving deeper into the trap. Imagine you are standing in that ravine now. The trees are taller than they were in 1995. The silence is the same. You are surrounded by the tools of your survival, yet they are useless because you no longer know who you are or where you are going. This is the forensic casual reality of the Vance case. We can track the pings, we can measure the GPS drift, we can analyze the metadata of a dying satellite phone, but we cannot measure the exact moment hope was replaced by the void. The mountains keep their secrets, but they leave behind these fragments, a tied boot, a silver thermos, a brass locket, to remind us of the cost of a shortcut. Why would they do this? The question echoes through the decades, a rhythmic, haunting refrain that no forensic lab can answer. We are left with the evidence log, a tragic inventory of a final pilgrimage that ended a mile and a half from the path. The reconstruction moves from the tangible to the psychological, a descent into the narrative truth that lies beneath the moss and silt. By the morning of the fourth day of the 2020 recovery, the forensic team had established a debris field that stretched 300 yards along the eastern slope of the Devil's Throat. This was not a site of a single event, but a site of a slow, agonizing dispersion. At 10:15 a.m., a specialized ground-penetrating radar unit, used to detect anomalies in soil density, flagged a signature near a cluster of ancient, gnarled oaks. Beneath a layer of sediment deposited by 2 decades of seasonal floods, the team uncovered the remains of a handheld GPS unit. It was an early model, a Magellan Trailblazer, its screen cracked and its casing scarred by the elements. In the lab, technicians would later attempt to recover data from its internal memory, hoping for a breadcrumb trail of coordinates that might explain the couple's erratic movement. What they found was a digital nightmare, a series of waypoints that looped back on themselves in a tight, frantic circle. This is the spiral of disorientation, a documented psychological phenomenon where, in the absence of a visible horizon or a reliable compass, the human body naturally favors one side, leading a person to walk in a perfect unintended ring. At 5:45 p.m. on September 12, 1995, Arthur Vance, the man who had spent his life defining the world through grids, was walking in circles. The metadata from the GPS suggests he realized the error. The waypoints show a sudden, sharp break from the loop, a straight line of travel that headed directly toward the steepest part of the ravine. It was a flight response. He had stopped thinking like a cartographer and started thinking like a cornered animal. The mountains don't explain why a man of his intellect would succumb to such a primal error. The mountains simply watch. As the team cleared more of the site, the grieving investigator proxy, represented now by the lead forensic anthropologist, Dr. Aris Thorne, began to piece together the final hours of Eleanor Vance. While Arthur's path was marked by frantic movement, Eleanor's was marked by a chilling, methodical stillness. 600 yards from the campfire, they found a small nest made of hemlock boughs. It was constructed with care, the branches woven together to provide a rudimentary barrier against the wind. Inside this shelter, they found a second journal. This one was not a leather-bound book, but the torn-out pages of the original, tucked into a plastic sandwich bag to protect them from the damp. This was her final message, written in the dark, the letters overlapping in a way that suggests she was writing by touch, alone. "Arthur is gone to find the light," the first page read. "He said the light was just over the ridge. I told him to stay. I told him the light was a trick." The open-loop question here is haunting. What light did Arthur see? In the dense, pitch-black woods of the Oakhaven Wilderness, there are no lights. There are no roads for 20 miles, no houses, no towers. The light over the ridge is a common hallucination in the advanced stages of hypothermia, a phenomenon known as lure of the lights, where the brain interprets the flickering of its own failing neurons as a distant campfire or a rescue lantern. Imagine you are Eleanor sitting in a nest of wet branches, watching your husband walk away into a freezing void because he believes he sees a way out that doesn't exist. You stay, you wait, you record the silence. At 11:20 p.m. on the night of the disappearance, the temperature in the devil's throat reached its nadir, 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Eleanor's final entry is a list, not of events, but of items, a final evidence log written by the victim herself. One wool sock, the silver locket, Arthur's map, 3 matches, the smell of pine, the sound of the wind. I am not afraid. I am just cold. The pacing of the text here slows to a crawl, a timestamp pacing that mimics the slow fading of a life. 12:01 a.m., 12:45 a.m., 1:30 a.m. The entries stop. The narrative truth reveals that Eleanor Vance died not of a fall or an injury, but of a quiet surrender to the atmosphere. She was found exactly where she had laid down, her red windbreaker, now faded to a dull pink, still wrapped tightly around her frame. The discovery of Arthur's remains took another 3 days. He was found nearly a mile away, at the bottom of a 70-foot drop. He had indeed found a light, but it was the moon reflecting off a sheer face of wet limestone that he had mistaken for a clearing. He had stepped off the edge of the world while looking for a shortcut. The forensic image of the fall site shows the absolute brutality of the terrain. The limestone is jagged, unforgiving. His compass was found in his pocket. It was later tested in a controlled environment and found to be perfectly functional. The sluggishness wasn't in the needle, it was in the mind of the man holding it. The rule of irony is absolute. His tools worked, his gear was sufficient, his knowledge was vast. None of it mattered once the void took hold. The expert victim is a cautionary tale for the modern hiker. We live in an era of forensic storytelling, where we believe that a GPS or a high-end backpack makes us invincible. But the mountains operate on a different timeline. The 2020 investigators standing in the devil's throat with their LiDAR felt the same chill that Arthur and Eleanor felt in 1995. The technology had changed, but the gravity of the tragedy had not. The grieving investigator looks at the silver thermos and the gap-toothed photo in the locket and realizes that the justice through memory we seek is often just a catalog of what was lost. We reconstruct the narrative to convince ourselves it won't happen to us. We find the items to close the loop, but the loop never truly closes. The evidence gathered at the site was transported back to the state lab. DNA extracted from the marrow of the remains confirmed the identity. The case was no longer unexplained, it was recovered. Yet, as the files were prepared for closing, one final anomaly emerged. The silver locket that Ethan had found near the campfire, the one containing his father's photo, was tested for fingerprints. There were 2 sets. One belonged to Eleanor. The second set belonged to a third party, someone who had touched the locket long after the couple had perished. This impossible discovery sent a shockwave through the investigation. The metadata of the forest suggested the locket had been moved sometime in the early 2000s. Someone had found the campfire, someone had seen the remains, and someone had chosen to say nothing. Why would they do this? The search for the ghost in the forensic record led back to archival logs. The fingerprints matched a local man named Silas Thorne, a hermit who had lived in a shack on the periphery until his death in 2012. When investigators searched his shack, they found a tin box. Inside was a collection of found objects and a handwritten note. "I found them in the year of the Great Frost. I didn't want to bring the world back to them. I let them sleep where the mountains took them. I kept the small things so they wouldn't be lonely." This revelation recontextualized the entire discovery. To the family, this was a second tragedy. To the grieving investigator, it was an act of mountain mercy. Silas had seen the expert victims in their final vulnerable state and decided that the narrative truth was better left to the earth. The metadata of the human heart is more complex than the pings of a satellite. By keeping the secret, he kept their story alive in the only way the mountains know how: through silence. The final evidence log was completed on December 12, 2020. Each object was a heavy anchor to a past that had finally been weighed. Ethan Vance stood at the trailhead one last time. The void had been measured and found to be exactly 1.5 miles wide. The moral warning is about the fundamental indifference of the natural world. Arthur Vance believed he could negotiate with the terrain. Eleanor Vance believed she could document her way out. They were both wrong. The mountains don't care about your maps, your journals, or your preparedness. Imagine you are standing on that summit now. You are only a visitor. The forest floor is a tapestry of decay and rebirth that will eventually include you, whether you stay on the path or not. No signal, no trace, just silence. The mountains keep their secrets, and sometimes the kindest thing we can do is stop asking them to speak. We find the artifacts for our own need for closure, but the true story remains in the gully, where the Earl Grey tea grew cold and the light over the ridge turned out to be a ghost. The Vance case is closed, but the devil's throat remains, waiting for the next person who thinks they know a faster way home. The mountains don't explain why, they never will.